Hey guys, happy Monday. So what I want to do today, I'm gonna try and make this video, under 10 minutes. I'm gonna go over these 9 foundational documents real quickly, and it's gonna be simplified. This document is gonna be used so that you can use it as a cheat sheet on the exam. I would suggest printing it out, and then you can have it right in front of you. So we're gonna look at all 9 of these documents, and it's gonna be simplified into a real simple graphic organizer, so you can use it and have it ready for the exam, and you can have it ready right in front of you in 2 weeks when you take the exam. Okay, so let's get into it. The first one, Articles of Confederation, okay? This is going way back to Unit 1 that we covered. This is the United States' first constitution. It governed through the American Revolution. Okay, the United States fought a war against Britain to become independent. This was the document that governed us during that time and afterwards, for a brief period of time afterwards. Okay, it failed because it lacked a centralized power. There was no strong federal government, okay? Each state had one vote in the legislature, no matter their size. So you had a huge state like Virginia compared to a relatively smaller state like Rhode Island, and they each had equal representation in Congress. Okay, population didn't matter in representation in this national legislature. Congress couldn't collect mandatory taxes or regulate interstate commerce. This inability to tax was kind of its biggest downfall. Okay, if a government that can't tax, it can't survive. Okay, that's how governments operate. That's how they raise revenues through tax dollars. Okay, so if they lack the power to tax, they lack many of their major powers. Okay, there was no central executive or national judiciary, no presidency, no national court system. Okay, so when states had disputes or if citizens had disputes with their state governments, there was no federal court system that could be used to kind of work out those differences. States basically did what they wanted. Okay, this led to internal conflict. You remember Shays' Rebellion, which was a rebellion of farmers in Massachusetts. The state of Massachusetts could do very little to fight back against it. They asked the federal government for help to quell the rebellion, and basically the federal government had very little recourse to deal with internal rebellions. So Shays' Rebellion kind of was this kind of wake-up call, especially to elitist property owners, that the Articles of Confederation were kind of a threat to their property. So in a lot of ways, Shays' Rebellion is why we have our current Constitution. Okay. And I want to go back. If you look at this cartoon too, okay, we looked at this cartoon towards the beginning of the year. All these were the problems with the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation is a ship, and these weaknesses are what eventually sank the ship, which led to the failure of the Articles of Confederation. Okay, it was a bad government. Declaration of Independence. Okay, it's just a statement that the 13 colonies were now an independent nation. Okay, you see the image here, a representation of George Washington. Here's the representation of the United States kicking this guy who's supposed to be the British out of the United States back to England. Okay, that's essentially what the Declaration of Independence stated. Okay, now importantly, it states that natural rights. There's statements of natural rights. Okay, people are born with rights. You're endowed by your Creator with certain unalienable rights. Okay, and the whole purpose of government, why government exists, is to protect those rights. Okay, we've definitely gotten away from this idea that the purpose of government is to protect rights. In a lot of ways, kind of the biggest threat to our rights is government now. Okay, popular sovereignty and consent to govern. The Declaration of Independence is all about putting the power of government in the people's hands. Okay, allowing the will of the people to be reflected in the government. Okay, right to abolish unjust governments. When governments take away your rights, you have the right to abolish those governments. Social contract is discussed in the document. This whole idea that that people and governments have this agreement that we as individuals give up a little bit of our liberty, and in return we get some of our safety from the government. Okay? Okay, it's not a governing document. Don't get this confused with the Constitution. The Declaration of Independence was written before the Constitution. This in no way sets up our government. This is kind of just a document we see as a statement of our principles and our ideals that we've tried to attain throughout our history. Okay, we definitely have not lived up to everything in this document throughout our history, and that's for sure. Okay, the Constitution. Okay, this is kind of what this whole class has been about: is the Constitution, and it's broken down into principles. Federalism. Okay, this idea of federal power and state power, local power. There's shared powers, and some powers are exclusive. Separation of powers. There's 3 branches of government. Checks and balances. Republican form of government. Okay, we don't have a direct democracy in the United States. We have a republic. Okay, we vote for representatives that represent us in government. Okay, limited government. Government can only do what's written down on paper. It's not like, Nazi Germany where Hitler could basically do whatever he wanted. Our government is limited to what they can do as written in the governing documents. That's what limited government is. Governments can only do what is written down and stated, and that, governments can't go beyond that. You got to remember the clauses and articles, the setup of the Constitution, all the different clauses, like the necessary and proper clause, the supremacy clause, all that is a part of the Constitution. Okay, and then the Bill of Rights and Amendments. The 10 first amendments are the Bill of Rights, and then the 17 amendments after that, 27 in total. Okay, now I've come up with some ways to remember all the Federalist Papers because there's several of them and it's hard to remember which is which. So there's going to be some rhymes for each of these. So the first one is Federalist 10. It's factions. Federalist 10, faction. Federalist 10, faction. So just remember 10, faction. Right? Stupid, correct. But hopefully you will remember it. Now, obviously, you're going to have this cheat sheet in front of you on the test, but if you know each document and what it is, it's going to, because of the time constraints, it's just going to help you if you know these documents by heart without having to rely on a cheat sheet. So Fed 10, faction. Fed 10, faction. Okay? So factions are the biggest threat facing the Republic. Okay, factions only look out for their own interests. Remember, factions are just groups that have similar interests, similar to interest groups. That's what we basically call factions interest groups today. Okay, factions are inevitable because of liberty. Okay, if you give people rights, they're going to form groups that they try to advocate for their own rights and kind of stances. So people are going to form these. If you give people rights, if you give them liberty, if you give them the right to petition their government, they're going to form groups. It's kind of, if you give people freedom, there's going to be factions. It's just how it is. Okay, but you can control the negative effects of factions, but not through direct democracy. That would lead to tyranny. So our founding fathers didn't advocate direct democracy, giving masses amounts of people a direct say in the government. Okay, they believe that the best way to control the effects of factions was to create a larger public with competing interests. So you have lots of different, and that's kind of has occurred today. We have lots of different interest groups. They all compete for influence over the government. Some are much more powerful than others because of wealth and numbers of membership and things like that. Okay, but in a lot of ways, what he warned and what is said in Federalist 10 has come true in our country. Okay, where interest groups are competing for sway over the government. Brutus 1. Okay, this is an anti-federalist paper. They advocate for a small republic. They were against the Constitution. They warned that if you give up power, you'll never get it back. Okay, the Constitution, they felt that the writer of Brutus 1 felt that we were going to yield too much power to the centralized government. We were never going to get it back. Okay, he thought the necessary and proper clause or the elastic clause will eventually give the government too much power. In a lot of ways, he was right. Okay, the power to tax leads to tyrannical governments. The federal government would destroy the states. That basically the federal governments become so powerful that state governments would become basically obsolete, okay, and unnecessary. Same with their court system. Okay. So Federalist 51, separation of powers, son. Federalist 51, separation of powers, son, because Federalist 51 is all about separation of powers. So 51, separation of powers, son. Since men are angels, there is a need for government to limit the ambition of men. Okay, separation of powers. Fed 51 is all about dividing the powers of government and creating a system of checks and balances. Okay, however, the need for limited government because they can become corrupt. Governments become corrupt, so you need to limit their powers. Okay, separation of powers. Divide the power amongst the three branches in order to counteract ambition. Okay, ambition. You need ambition to counteract ambition, meaning you need branches' powers need the ability to check the ambition of other branches. Okay, and all those three branches all work together and they all check each other's powers. Checks and balances. Each branch will guard its own power and keep the other branches in check. Okay, and Congress has the most power of the three branches. It's divided into two houses so they can check each other's power. Okay, the legislative branch divided into the House and Senate, and within the Congress itself, within the legislative branch itself, it has its own checks and balances system. Okay. Fed 70, executive with energy. Fed 70, executive with energy. Fed 70, executive with energy. Okay, this is all about having an energetic executive. First of all, Hamilton argues for a unitary executive, that the executive should be one person. Okay, there shouldn't be a ruling council like they had in Rome and things like that. The executive must be strong and energetic. Congress needs to be slow to act, while executive needs to act fast, and one person can act faster than a group. That's why he advocated for having the president as one person, quickly able to act to crisis. Okay, having an energetic executive means having the single leader with the ability to act quickly and decisively when needed. That's what energy in the executive means. Okay. Fed 78, it's for the judiciary's sake. Fed 78, it's for the judiciary's sake. Okay. Fed 78, it's for the judiciary's sake. Okay, judiciary is the least dangerous branch because they can make laws. They can't make laws. They can't raise revenue. They can't declare war or even enforce their own rulings. Remember, when the Supreme Court makes a ruling, it's basically on the executive branch and the legislative branch to carry out that ruling. Okay, and that's one check on the judicial's power is their decisions are sometimes ignored. Okay. Life terms for judges. Okay, it was advocated that judges should have lifelong terms. Once they're appointed, okay, and approved by the Senate, they are now independent. They are now kind of removed from political pressures like members of the executive and legislative branch are. In the United States, we have what's called an independent judiciary. They are supposed to operate, once appointed for life, they are supposed to operate separately from the legislative and executive branches. And you see this cartoon here where you have the legislative with great power, the executive with great power, and kind of the judicial are just the referees trying to call the shots on the outside, determine if the rules are being followed. Okay? Okay, the judiciary must remain independent, like I just said, from the other two branches, like what this cartoon is showing. Okay, in the power of judicial review, in Fed 78, he talks about how the federal judiciary should have the power to review laws and executive actions to determine their constitutionality. So Article 3 doesn't create judicial review, although through documents like Fed 78, it's been assumed through precedent that this was a power intended to be given to the judiciary of the United States. Okay, the last one, letter from Birmingham jail. Okay, the most recent one. This demanded that the ideals of the Declaration of Independence and Constitution, specifically the 14th Amendment, finally applied to everybody. Okay, it listed grievances. Like in the Declaration of Independence, it listed all these issues the colonists were having with Great Britain. So what Martin Luther King did was he did that for African Americans. Okay, they listed a set of grievances against the federal government. Okay. Now, freedom has never been given, only when demanded. So freedom is never voluntarily given up by the oppressor, okay? It has to be taken. Advocates for civil disobedience and direct action, okay? Breaking unjust laws, protesting, okay? Getting directly active to try and change things. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Another famous quote, okay? Unjust laws should be broken. Okay, it's become the playbook for the protest movements in the United States. Okay, most nonviolent protest movements use Martin Luther King's tactics as their playbook. Okay, so that's the last one. Okay, guys, so you now have this cheat sheet. Hopefully, you typed in the notes of the dots that were missing. Now you have this in front of you as a helper on the exam. Okay, so hopefully this helps out, and I'll see you guys all on Wednesday. Peace.